I did butcher it.
No, no.
I added the
Well, you got that.
Now, what branch of the service were you in? And how did you get in?
The Army Air Corps. It was my junior year of college in Nebraska Wesleyan, and Army and Navy recruiters came by, and I took a look at both of them and decided that fixed base might be a little better than perhaps a movable landing field. So I went with the Army Air Corps. That was 1942, and I was inducted, I guess, in December of '42, and went to Jefferson Barracks, which was my boot camp, Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, in February '43. So that begins the story.
What was boot camp like? Now, so you're college age. You're 19, 20. How old are you?
I'm about 20, I guess.
When you went,
Yeah.
no, you were 19.
19?
You were 20 when you were commissioned, 13 months later. So you were 18 at first when you enlisted.
Yeah.
So you're just a kid.
Well,
Yeah,
yes.
I'd say so. Yeah. Yes, I was. So I was 19, I think. Must have been 20, 21. Yeah, I think that's right.
You were 20 when you, that's right.
Yeah, okay.
Commissioned.
Single or married?
I was single. I was a college student, and of course the bombing of Pearl Harbor had taken place, and so everyone was going to be involved in the service one way or the other, and so I enlisted then. And the boot camp was just a typical boot camp when it's very, very cold in February in Missouri, and so I got through that all right. And then I went to McAllister College in St. Paul, Minnesota. College, kind of a brush up on math and science and things of that nature. And after that period of time, I went to the West Coast, where I actually went through my pre-flight training and my flight training, graduating from Douglas, Arizona in 1944, class of 44C. That Douglas is a twin-engine base, so I graduated in twin-engine airplanes, hoping at that time to go into B-25s. However, our losses in Europe were very great. We were involved in daylight bombing, and fighter protection was still in its infancy in terms of long-range fighter protection. And so the raids in Europe, either from the 8th Air Force or the 15th, the casualties were quite large. And so it was necessary for there to be replacements, and so I ended up a replacement. I ended up on B-24 bombers as a co-pilot.
As co-pilot.
Yeah.
So, okay, you know the war's going on now.
Yes.
And I mean, looking back, you know you were a replacement. Did you know at that time you were a replacement? I mean, what's going on in your head? Here's this pretty young kid.
Well, as you know, as you go through you finish your fight training and you're assigned. I was assigned to B-24s. But prior to actually going on a B-24, you had a crew assignment, because you had to have a bombardier, you had to have a navigator, you had to have a first pilot, you had to have gunners and so forth. And all this was done in Lincoln, Nebraska, where this crew was put together. And then the crew, then we were sent to Boise, Idaho, where the actual B-24 training began. And it was at Boise that I got married also. So two eventful things happened there.
Aha. So is this a college sweetheart, or a sweetheart that you met in your travels, or a hometown sweetheart?
It would have to be the latter, because we really don't know when we first met. We both are from the farm, and our farms are not adjoining, but very close by. Went to the same high school, and so we've known and our mothers worked together in a local grocery store. So we've been thrown together, known each other, from the very beginning, and so there isn't any time when the light just suddenly flashed. But we became interested while we were in college. Rita also went to Nebraska Wesleyan, and so that's when that could be the beginning of our courtship and romance and eventual wedding. And let's see, we've been together for 57 years.
All right.
What?
Not quite.
Not quite.
Almost.
56 years. Edit that out.
So you're okay. See, now this is what I don't understand, because here you are, early 20s.
Yeah.
You're training to go to a war.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that in a second, what's going on in your head. Now you get married. Was there no fear of going to this war? I mean, getting married and going to war, leaving your wife back home because you know you're going to go over there and serve.
Well,
what were you thinking?
Well, we had talked about that, and we had made the decision to get married. So then it became the second decision was, when? Do you wait till the war is over? And that's indefinite. You really don't know at that time because you're in the service for as long as the war is on, plus 6 months. And in the 40s, when we were talking about 43 and 44, it's difficult to see when the war was going to end at that stage of the game. But we decided to go ahead. Thinking about the alternatives and so forth, we decided, okay, we'll get married before I go overseas. So we did. May the 8th, 1944.
Huh. Did you get the date right? May 8th?
Absolutely.
Good man. Good man.
I tell you, I wouldn't miss that.
So now you go through the training, you get your flight training. Now, is there a sense of fear in your mind at all at this point of where you're headed?
For me, no, and I think I would guess that probably the same for most of the guys going through the training. You're young. You really don't think anything's going to happen or can happen to you. And so no, there wasn't any fear. We knew what we're trying to do, and that was to become acquainted with a 4-engine bomber and become proficient in that. And we had people who were trained in various aspects or various stations aboard the bomber, and so we were working together as a unit. And I think our concerns were as much about that, becoming proficient and doing a good job, as we didn't think about the consequences. Obviously, they were there, because we were aware of people getting killed, and the Gold Star mothers, I don't know whether you're familiar with that, where if somebody had a death in the family, the home usually had a gold star in the window or something of that nature. So we were aware of those, but you never think that's going to happen to you. You just don't worry about the future.
Huh. So knowledge of the war front, because it sounds like you got two things going on. You're very busy learning the bomber.
Yeah.
So that's taking your time up right there. You're a newlywed, so there's part of your time. What images are you seeing from the war front, or is that kind of separate at this point? Newsreels and things of that sort.
Well, I probably third priority, or probably separate from this point. And again, would be newsreels and newspapers, knowing full well that the Allies have been successful in certain engagements. At this time, we were also speculating on when D-Day would begin, when the invasion of Europe would begin. Because you see, this was May, essentially, in 1944, and the invasion of Europe came in early June. So that hadn't happened yet, and there was always that speculation of when are we going to invade, and what is that going to bring? Those are all unknowns, and so it's kind of a third priority. Priorities, as you mentioned a minute ago, learning the bomber and getting married, and the D-Day, the front and the invasion of Europe, probably third in priority. Attention to it, we knew it had to happen, but it's a little hard to project what part an individual is going to play in the whole picture. So I wouldn't say there was any fear or any real dread of the future at that time. It was an unknown, and it was something that we're being trained for, and hopefully we'd get through.
So, question just popped in my mind. I haven't asked him before. What was your history knowledge like prior to this? All of a sudden, there's these countries that we're talking about, and some big and some small areas and things like that. Did you have the faintest idea, really, where any of this was? Or
well, I've always been interested in history, and in the high school I was in, even though it was a very, very small high school, in the late 1930s, when Hitler was on his rampage and making the speeches, we used to have an assembly of all the kids. We were small enough so we could, and we listened to Hitler's speeches. And so because of that, we had to know something about the land he was talking about. So we were getting a history lesson along with that, learning about the invasion, where he was going to invade, and what part of the country, or where this country was, and so forth. So I at least had a knowledge of the events, and I also have an interest in history, and so I probably absorbed more, perhaps, than someone else who wasn't that interested. Huh. So I felt I had a pretty good background as far as where these countries were, and perhaps what the overall scheme was, which is to invade Europe and eventually be triumphal over Hitler, or the Axis powers of Japan also later on.
So once you got done with your training and everything, where were you first sent for active duty, for combat duty?
Okay. I finished my training in Boise, Idaho, and had a few days leave before going to Topeka, Kansas, to pick up a new B-24. And just so happened that 4th of July came about. This was the last of June and early July, and so I spent the 4th in Nebraska, and celebrated at my wife's home. They had a fried chicken, and we had ice cream, and we had all of the things that you would expect for a traditional 4th of July celebration. And then went to, after that, we had to go to Topeka, pick up our airplane, and left the States on the 10th of July, 1944, in a brand new bomber, flying across the country, and then eventually left from Gander, Newfoundland, which is the base there, and landed on the Azores, which is a little island in the middle of the Atlantic. The Azores over to Marrakech, Morocco, and eventually worked our way into southern Italy, where our base was. And that was in the mid-July. And on the 25th of July, I was shot down. So in 21 days, I went from feast to fasting.
Boy, before I get to the being shot down part, now here's this new kid who's got a brand new plane that you're flying in. Now, are you flying in squadron at this time?
No, we're flying singly.
No kidding. So you go to Topeka, you pick up this plane.
That's right.
And they said, here are your directions.
That's right. You fly to Massachusetts first, and then you fly into Gander, Newfoundland, and then you fly to the Azores, and then Morocco, and skirt the coast along the Mediterranean, but on the African side, and eventually you get far enough, you go across the Mediterranean and fly into southern Italy.
So, I mean, is this exciting at this point?
Well, yes, although you don't think of it as exciting. It's all new, and you've never been there before. So, every experience is a new experience. Exciting, perhaps to some extent, but also kind of mind-boggling. And for a kid just off the farm, this is part of the world I had never seen before. So, you have thoughts like that, too. Getting into a new environment, a new country, and so forth. Brand new to this guy.
I just imagine your mind has just got to be going up and down. I mean, there's the war, but look at this new country, and I got a plane, and
That's right, and we depend now on our navigator. We find out how good the training is, because if he's not on the ball, we're not going to make the Azores, which is a very small spot in the Atlantic to begin with, and then of course the various spaces along the way, and really you don't want to get lost in a situation like that.
Yeah, that would be a good one.
Yeah, and so you have that. That's kind of woven into it too. Some tension because it's all new, and there's not a map before you. That is, what you're supposed to do, and hopefully you're going to do it.
Now, you had to leave your wife back home.
Yes.
What was that like? Is it like the movies, or is there a different reality to it?
It's like the movies, all right. Yeah, you come to the realization when you do that, when you leave, at least in the situation in which we found ourselves, that I might not be back. I don't think we ever talked about it specifically, but I think we had to be aware of the fact I was leaving, and I might not come back. And on the other hand, it's just like so many thousands, hundreds of thousands of other guys did. If they didn't leave their wives, they certainly left their families, their mothers and their fathers and siblings and so forth, best friends. It's that going away, not knowing whether you're going to come back, but everybody thinks they are, obviously. And no, it's a serious time, stressful time.
Well, that had to be hard. I mean, I can't, I think it's just hard situation, just leaving somebody, even knowing you're coming back, but yet to have that unspoken relationship there.
Oh, you can ask my wife when you talk to her what her feelings were about that.
Huh. So now you fly over, you have your assignment, and we've done a number of missions before we get shot down, or mission number one, or what happens here?
Well, I was shot down on mission number one, the very first mission. My crew had been up the day before. They had there was a senior pilot who flew in my seat with my first pilot, just for orientation purposes and things of that nature. And so they were on their second mission, but for me it was the mission number one, and it took me 293 days to complete it.
So what was your mission? Now you're flying a bombing mission, right?
Yes. We're based in southern Italy, a little place called Toretto, but it's close to Bari, Italy, and Cerignola. There are a whole number of air bases in this area. And we're flying to Linz, Austria, which is almost straight north. It's up across the Adriatic and into, as I say, Austria. Linz was the second largest city in Austria, and we were to bomb the Hermann Göring tank factory. So that was our mission. Still remember at the briefing, we were in this briefing room, and the officer of the day comes in and walks up the front, and we come to attention, and then a few preliminary remarks about the mission itself, and then they unveil the map, which shows where you are in relation to where the mission is. And I can still remember it's a large map on a wall, and our base is way down here, and there's a red string that goes way up to the top of the map. Oh my, this is going to be a long ride. And we went through the pre-flight and all the intelligence and reports and so forth, and it sounded like it was going to be a relatively easy mission. Although I don't know why it should be, because Linz was the second largest city in Austria and was a heavily industrialized place. When you stop and think, there's no way in the world it's not going to be defended. And anyway, we went blithely on our way and flew until 10 minutes after 11, July 25th, 1944. We were bounced by a number of fighters. And in reading the official report, that is the report that is written up after the mission, these are from the official records, I find out there were 25 twin-engine fighters and 125 single-engine fighters that attacked our group. We had 21 airplanes, and in our group, 461st, and 11 of them were shot down over or around the target and they were shot down by fighters. 4 of them crashed on their way home, never made it to the base, and 6 of them eventually got back to the air base. So they singled us out for whatever reason, and just devastated us. Really took care of our group. So that was what happened over the target.
Had you released your bombs, or you still had?
We were in trouble. We were set afire by a fighter. It was an FW-190, Focke-Wulf 190, one of the very best that the Germans had. And the plane came up from underneath, and I saw the fighter pilot. He went right by my window. I was flying on the right seat, and he came up, and he was just right to I just looked out and saw him. There he was. And set us afire, and so we had lots of flames all around us, I guess, and smoke all over, and knocked out 2 engines. It was an airplane that was definitely in serious trouble, and particularly with the fire. It became evident that the only course that made real good sense was to leave that airplane. And so 20-some thousand feet. I jumped out. Prior to leaving, however, we salvoed our bombs, which means that we have a lever that just gets rid of all the bombs at one time. And so we just pulled that lever and all the bombs dropped out. So the bomb bay door was open, and I jumped. I jumped and I landed in a meadow. And I landed hard in a meadow. And after I took a minute or two to clear my head, I stood up. And over to my right, I heard, someone yelled, and I looked over there, and there was a member of the Home Guard with a rifle pointed at me, and he took a shot at me. Didn't hit me either by design or because he was didn't hold the rifles steady enough. But we weren't too far away, so I guess he probably intentionally missed. And so I took a quick look at my situation. Now there was a tree line off to the left, but that was about 50 yards away. There was about 12 to 15 inches of cover in the meadow. That would just barely, cover me. There was a guy over to the right with a gun who wanted to defend his homeland in the worst way. So I decided, I guess that's it. And so I surrendered at that point. And I was taken to Searchlight Battery, which was close by, or a house in part of the complex, and was there for a little while. And another enlisted man from another crew came, and so the two of us eventually were loaded in the back of a pickup truck, or a truck that, open air truck, let's put it that way. Slowly we went around the countryside. We went through villages, and we went through the countryside, and the people were quite, or many of them were very agitated. Many of them were very angry. Some of them were curious, and those were the emotions that they displayed as we went by. Yeah, we were just kind of taken through as an example of, what the Home Guard, what they were able to, the military was able to do in defending the homeland. Anyway, we were happy that we were under the Home Guard, that there was some military control, because we had known also at that time that some of the guys that were shot down were killed by the civilians, and there was always the question of whether you should be armed or should be unarmed. I happened to be unarmed that particular day, so I really had no way of defending myself anyway. But a number of individuals who were shot down were killed. In my case, I was picked up, right by the military right away and taken through the countryside. And we ended up before a very large stone building or building, yeah, I guess that's right, institution of some sort, heavy, big, bulky, large institution. And I was helped through the front gates of this place by a swift kick in the rear. That was my entrance into this camp, and it was a concentration camp, or at least I thought it was a concentration camp, and I based that on the clothing that the individuals were wearing, the type of individuals. There was a whole range. They were not, they were not military. They were men and women and young people, and at that time I had seen enough newsreels to know there was something about concentration camps. So I guessed, well, this is a concentration camp that I'm in. And so this other enlisted man and myself, we were in this concentration camp, stood along the wall. We were objects of interest from the inmates. And it was a large camp. There were many people. The guards kept the inmates away, but they're very curious. There were a couple of barracks of women. We could see that. And then we just stood by ourselves, and eventually the gate would open and some more Allied flyers would come in. Guys had been shot down over the raid on Lintz. And until late in the afternoon, I suppose we had collected about 35 or 40. That evening and the next couple of evenings, we were, along the way, 6 of my crew eventually ended up in the same camp, in this concentration camp. And that evening, all 7 of us were put in a very small cell. And we spent a couple of nights and days in this camp. Heard screams at night. Didn't help our sleeping too much. Didn't know where we were or what the situation was, except that here we were as prisoners in this large camp.
So nobody's. It's kind of chaotic in the fact that nobody's saying, "Here's where you are. Here's what's happening." They're just.
No. Yeah, it's pretty chaotic. That's right. Yeah.
What's going through? Can you remember what's going through your head at this time? Because I can't imagine being taken out of an environment and put. I assume that there's a language barrier that you're facing with a lot. You've got all this going around. You've got some of your crew back together. But can you remember what your? Are you thinking escape? Are you thinking just? Say yes sir, no sir, and go along? Or is it just so overwhelming that you can't even describe the thought process?
Well, you have all kinds of emotions when you first get down. When I first land, you're thankful you're down. You're fearful. I mean, after all, this wasn't supposed to happen. You're angry because it did. Whole series of emotions that first hit you when you're down. One of the first things, I'll go back just a minute. One of the first things you notice, and after you've parachuted, is the quiet. It is so quiet. You've been in this airplane, which is a very noisy airplane, and guns firing and things of that nature, and then all of a sudden you're out with you and your parachute, and it's so very quiet. All you hear is a little drone chute, which is a little chute you have on the top that goes out first, flapping on your parachute. And so that's one emotion, that's one feeling you have. Gee, this is so quiet. Well, eventually, as I say, landing, you're overwhelmed. What comes next? This isn't supposed to happen. What do I do? No one's here to tell me. Have all kinds of thoughts like that going through your head. And of course, in the concentration camp, now I'm with 6 of my other crewmen. So we have there's a group of us that are together, and so it gives you some feelings of some stability anyway, or cohesiveness. I'll finish up on this concentration camp because there's another story that goes with it. And that is, I didn't know the name of the camp. And it wasn't until 1988 I went to, my wife and I went to Jerusalem with a tour group. And in Jerusalem we went to the Holocaust Museum. And in the Holocaust Museum, I spotted the concentration camp that was closest to Linz, Austria. So I found out the name. It's called Mauthausen. And in 1990 I visited, and just this last summer I visited it again. It's still there. It's a museum. I saw the place where I was spent the first couple of nights. It also housed the crematorium. And so that's probably one reason for the screams that we heard at night. The camp was a very active camp. It started in 1938. And so that was our first days as prisoners. We were still under one of the things I need to mention, we were under the jurisdiction of the German Air Force. We were captured by the Home Guard, but it was a military group that captured us, and the concentration camp, Mauthausen, of course, was run by the SS, the Gestapo, and because we were under the military, we were able to, they housed us, and then they took us out of there. It would not have been such the whole scenario would have been a little bit different if we'd have been in that concentration camp for a long time, because it was a very brutal one. And but we was, just as I say, were there a couple of days, a couple of nights. And then they started us along the normal channel of, we went to Frankfurt. The main interrogation center was outside of Frankfurt, Germany. And we went through that. I was put in solitary confinement in this interrogation center. Expected to spend quite a little time, or at least several days there, because I looked on the wall and somebody along the way had scratched 4 marks and then a slash through, and then another mark, and it looked like that had happened several times. And so I thought, well, it might be that this is going to be my home for a while. And but as it turned out, when I met with the interrogator, I gave my name, rank, and serial number, and then he told me a lot of things about my life, about where I graduated from Douglas, Arizona, from flight school. I think he mentioned, well, he did. He mentioned I was from Nebraska, and gave my mother's maiden name, and so he had quite an extensive background on me. He also knew enough about my group and And when we'd come, and so we knew he had a second lieutenant on the first mission who really didn't know very much. And so I didn't spend much time in solitary. I mean, there really wasn't any point in spending time and interrogating this guy. And the losses were pretty heavy, so there were a number of people to interrogate. So they shoved me along the line very quickly.
When they gave you all the information, basically said, "We know who you are."
Yeah, essentially right.
Was that a fear tactic? What are they doing to your head at that point?
Well, obviously, even though they have a great background of information about you and a number of, many, many people, there are always some bits of information that they don't have. And so as, good interrogators, what they're trying to do is they're saying, well, we have all this information on you, and then they slip in a question, how about this or that? And hopefully, since they have all this information, then, one more little bit of information, obviously, is going to make that much difference. That's the individual's perspective. But as far as the interrogator is concerned, there's a little piece over here that's missing that fits into a broader piece. And so that's what they're searching for, I'm sure. But in my case, it became quite obvious. There really wasn't anything that I could offer them. I mean, what the heck? I barely knew the name of my base, let alone, I didn't have any military secrets.
Was it a casual event, or is it again like the movies, the one light shining on you, or did they come in and they were kind of your buddy, or?
Well, I'd say it wasn't quite like the movies where you were under a spotlight. More of a casual situation. I remembered that the individual interrogator spoke very good English. Yes, it's kind of a professional approach. I mean, although there are no threats, at least I wasn't. There weren't any threats to me. Here you are, and this is what we want to know. Here are some, and I ask some questions, and you can say what you can say. But in my case, they knew so much about me, and the fact that I didn't have much to offer, and so I didn't spend a long time in solitary or before the interrogator. But it wasn't, it wasn't quite like the movies, in as much as you had a whole bunch of guys standing around. Probably in certain situations, I'm sure that's true. It probably happened if you happen to be a squadron commander or a group commander or someone that really had some information. Well, obviously, the Germans would do their very best to get the information out of you. And anyway, that was my.
So to this point, they've been, relatively nice to you. It sounds like.
At this point, yes, we hadn't. We were prisoners. We were always under guard, and the guards had guns, and we were always warned not to try to escape because we would be shot and things of that nature. But probably. Routine, or that's what was to be expected. Yeah.
So where do you, after this venture to, where do you?
The next stop is kind of a collection point where a number of prisoners are brought in, probably from the same interrogation center and maybe from others. And it's at this point that we get Red Cross parcels. And we're given a parcel that includes underwear and shirts and toothpaste and toothbrushes and a whole series of things that are important to just trying to look and see if it's called a capture parcel, and it's from the Red Cross and includes the basics such as a shirt, trousers, underwear, overcoat, wool cap, socks, toothbrush, and things of that nature. And we also get a good meal in this place. And I don't know, we're here a couple of days, or at least probably a day or two. And when they have a sufficient number of prisoners to start the trek to the permanent camp, we wait there until that number is whatever the Germans want, and then we're on our way. In my case, I went to Stalag Luft number 1, which is near Barth, Germany. It's up on the Baltic. It's a little fishing village, and it was an Air Force camp. And when I went into camp, my prison number is 5,155. And by the time that the camp was liberated, the next following May, we had over 10,000 prisoners. So it turned out to be a very large camp. The other large Allied Air Force camp was, of course, Stalag III. And that became famous because of the great escape that was carried out by the British, not by the Americans, but by the Brits. And that was Stalag III. But we were in one in Barth, Germany.
So, okay, so they put you on a truck and haul you out there, or?
We went by train.
Oh, by train, okay.
Yeah. In my case, I went in not a cattle car. Some of the guys were transported in the old the old cattle cars, I guess that's probably a way of saying it. But in my case, I was in a passenger type of vehicle, and I really don't remember very much about the ride to Barth, Germany. I remember sleeping in the baggage rack at various times. I remember being crowded, and I remember we were always worried about being bombed whenever we were in a marshalling yard or where a large concentration of railroad cars and tracks. We're always worried about being strafed when we were out on the railroad, during the day. But other than that, I guess I was able to get through it all right, and I certainly don't remember it much of those 4 days. I think it took 4 days or 5, but I'm really pretty hazy about remembering the details. And I've thought many times, but I can't recall what happened.
I think that's understandable. Did you know by this time? I mean, now you've kind of been through their system. Did you have a pretty good idea that now we are headed to the camp?
Yes. I think probably we're told that also. Means quite specifically, now you are going to go to a permanent camp. And so that's what we were about.
Do you remember arriving? You don't remember the transport. Do you remember?
Yes, I remember we arrived, I imagine, early morning. I remember that. And took us off of the car that we were on, or the train that we were on, and marched us for a couple miles to this permanent camp, Stalag number 1. I remember that, yes. There, I spent or the first couple of weeks in Barth, I spent in a tent. They had tents attached to barracks, and so that we could walk through a window or crawl through a window and use the latrine in the barracks part. But we were in tents. And after a couple of weeks, they opened another section of camp. They were in the process of adding on to this camp. And 13 of the prisoners who just happened to be in the tents together and over the couple of weeks had become very well acquainted. We managed to get in the same room in the new section of camp. And all through our months of captivity, and even though we changed rooms several different times, the 13 of us stayed together. And so we bonded, and we became a family. Eventually, that expanded to 24, and we have meetings every other year of our roommates, of these roommates. So we really bonded together very well as a family, which helped us immensely in the time that we spent in camp. And one of the things we did, we pooled all of our food. So anyone that had any food, or if we got Red Cross parcels or something, we just put them in a common pantry, and then we had cooks, and so we just operated as our own individual unit, which didn't happen in other rooms. Individuals paired off or something of that nature. And it proved, I think, to be a very important move as I look back, because we depended on each other. We became, as I mentioned before, we were bonded, and that just helped us during the long winter evenings and so forth. And
what's your day like now? I mean, what do you do while you're in camp? What do they...
Well, you walk. That's one thing you do. You walk and you walk and you walk inside the wire, round and around and around the camp. If you go to a zoo and you see animals that are in a cage or in an enclosure, and you see them walk constantly back and forth and so forth, that's a good representation of what prisoners did. They were by the most part in very good physical shape, and they had to just get rid of some of the energy, and so and they also had to do something about the time. So they walked around, they talked to individuals, and round and around the camp we would go. So that's part of a day. We also food preparation and food was always excuse me, a high priority, and it became a higher priority as time went on, as we became as Red Cross parcels further divided. At one time, when we first went into camp, if you had a Red Cross parcel per person per week, you had no real problems with hunger or anything such as that, because that was adequate. About 7.5 pounds of food and good variety, and so you could work out some very good meals, and really that wasn't so bad.
Favorite meal?
Oh, we used to make cake. Oh, that's a dessert, but make cake out of powdered milk and sugar and graham crackers, and let's see, we had probably chocolate pudding. So to put that all together, we made a cake.
So did each little unit have their own kitchen, or I mean, where were you baking this cake?
Well, we just had a large room. Well, not a large room, but room about this size probably. And we had a little stove in one end of it. And it was on that little stove that we did all our baking and whatever else. But to do the baking, of course, we had to build an oven. So we also had to build all our utensils, which we did. And we used the metal out of the dried milk cans, and we used the solder out of we used all the metal that we had in the corned beef cans and Spam cans and the dried milk cans and so forth. And then that became our raw materials, and from there we made all the cooking things that we needed. So we had eventually we built an oven, and in this oven then we did baked our. If we had cake, we baked our cake on top of the stove, of course, and it wasn't quite like Mom made, but it was pretty good. And so that was, always the food preparation and the food. And as our stay in prison camp went on, and as the food source was cut down, the food aspect became much more important. I mean, we were constantly talking and thinking about food. But you were asked about the day. The YMCA brought in or sent in sports equipment, and so when the weather was all right, and we played ball and played volleyball and in some cases there was football, I guess. And so we had some sporting activities, and we even had leagues in camp, particularly in softball, I can remember. Another thing we did, I think it was from the YMCA, we received a number of books, and so we had a library of sorts. And so obviously we'd read.
Did are you still being treated fairly now? I mean, the guards?
Well, we're in a big camp, and there are guard towers, and there's a warning wire, and there are guards constantly there, and you know very well if you go with a warning wire, you're in danger of being shot. At night, the barracks are buckled up, dogs are turned loose, and so they run through the camp and discourage any tunneling or attempts to escape and things of that nature. So, that's you're aware. You know very well you're a prisoner. If for no other reason that walking inside that wire and looking out and seeing the barbed wire and the fence and the guard towers, you're very much aware of that you're not free by any means.
Did they have jobs for you to do? Did they? I know that in some of the Japanese prison camps, I mean, the amount of work that they had to do.
Oh yes, no. The Geneva Conventions forbids the officers from working. They're not permitted to work. The enlisted men on my crew, I learned later, they were out on farms and they were working. But in this particular camp, which was all Allied flyers, all officers, there's no work.
So they obeyed by the Geneva Convention rules?
Yeah, I would say generally, I would make this as a general statement, that the Germans had signed on to the Geneva Convention. And up to a point, you could say that they certainly followed the conventions. It's always difficult, to stand back and look at the situation. You know very well that the Germans were having a difficult time, and you can understand, at least I can anyway, that to give superior treatment to prisoners or treatment or conditions, food and so forth, that were a lot better than they were experiencing, or they had an opportunity to be a part of. I can understand that there could be some areas where they didn't meet the full expectations of the Geneva Conventions. However, the mere fact that they had signed on, there certainly were great differences between the prisoners of the Germans and the prisoners of the Japanese, the American prisoners of the Germans and Japanese. Anyway, you walk. Of course, one of the problems you have in prison camp is the fact that it's pretty difficult to get away, to be by yourself. You don't have to. I mean, there are times when you like not to be a part of hundreds of guys. And when you're in a room it's not very large, and you have from 15 to 25 guys in this room, there are people around all the time. And so one of the things that's always difficult is to find a moment to be by yourself, and so that's part of the camp life also. So you try to, and of course, there's an advantage in having people around, because there's lots of opportunities for learning new stories and talking about it. And as we were in camp, we also set up a school. And so we had courses taught by people who were very proficient in certain areas. I remember taking a couple classes of navigation, celestial navigation. Not that I was going to be a navigator, but very interesting to see how these guys operated and how they were able to tell where we were. They were flying, and they used their instruments and tell us pretty much exactly where we were.
Let me hold that thought for a second. I got to switch a tape here.